welcome to the first economics tutoring session for the IB diploma. Today I'll just be going over Unit 1, which is the Introduction to Economics, and the very first part of what you learn in the IB. This in the textbook and on the syllabus is labeled as a whole separate unit because economics is split up between Introduction to Economics, micro, macro, and global economy. So this is a whole separate part, but since it's only one, I can walk through the whole thing in one video today. So the first part of before we start, I would like to talk about how I will be going about this video today. So because there's no quantitative measures or explanations needed in this section, I will just be walking through the textbook and explaining a little bit more in depth of what it just says basically. And at some point there is a little bit of quantitative explanation I have to do, so then I will explain that separately. So to begin, the first chapter talks about understanding the nature of economics. So as we know, economics is a social science. Why? This is because economics studies human behavior with money within society. So within economics, we mainly study the relationships that humans and money have. Most people tend to think that economics is simply the study of money, but in my opinion, it really isn't, because money couldn't have formed without human behavior and human psychology. So economics is actually a lot of the time is based on psychology, and a lot of the models that we have is based upon how we behave as humans. So economics is very much based on sociology, psychology, etc. So social sciences also include anthropology, political science, psychology, etc. So we can see a lot of these sciences come into economics as well. Anthropology especially comes into economic history, if that's something that interests you. So economics is usually split up into microeconomics and macroeconomics. The IB splits it up even further by adding the global economy, which we will get into way later on. But mainly micro and macro are the two main ones. Within these there are many more, which I'll explain in a second. So micro literally means microeconomics. So we kind of zoom in to the economy. We look at specific businesses, the behavior of individuals, etc. So households, businesses, and many more. It's everything that's like the bigger scale, but you can just think of it like a microscope almost. So within microeconomics, we look at decision makers and how they behave. This is generally the part where psychology is most relevant. For example, behavioral economics tends to be a big part of microeconomics. Within microeconomics, we also have corporate economic, business economics, etc. So then macro is just the opposite. We look at the economy as a whole, and by economy as a whole, we tend to talk about a specific country. An economy is equal to a country. So the South African economy, we're talking about South Africa then. So you can think of that like we're zooming it out. When we talk about macroeconomics, we use aggregates, which are wholes or collections of many individual units. When we talk in micro, you'll see later on that we talk about quantity demanded, whereas in macro we talk about aggregate demand, because we're talking about the demand for all the goods in the economy, because we're not zooming in, we're looking at everything as a whole. Within macroeconomics, the IB doesn't do this, but usually the global economy falls within this. We usually have government policy within this field, and etc. So the key concepts are very important when it comes to your IA later on. I will just briefly go over them since you will use them or become more familiar with them later on. So the first one is scarcity, which refers to the idea that resources are insufficient to satisfy unlimited human needs and wants. So this means that for example, there aren't enough goods in the world to satisfy all of us. One big one that's actually a major issue right now is oil. Oil is running out, it's scarce, and when the scarcity really starts to show, when we run out of oil and it starts to really take a toll on the economy and the global economy actually, we will see scarcity take a toll on the production of oil, the price for oil, and the demand for oil. Then we have choice, which in the book says Since resources are scarce, it is not possible for all human needs and wants to be satisfied. So when resources are scarce, we have to make a choice. We can choose between one product or the other. We can decide to produce it or not produce it. This will later fall into, in this unit, actually, the production possibilities curve. Then we have efficiency, which refers to making the best possible use of scarce resources to avoid resource waste. Efficiency can mean a lot of things in economics. It can relate to sustainability, to make sure that we're not wasting any resources that are harmful, to reduce the impact. It can refer to using labor in the best way possible so that we are really making as much use of it and we don't need more workers. We'll go into this even further, and also allocative efficiency, which you don't need to know just yet since we go more into depth in it later. Then we talk about equity, which is the idea of being just, fair or just. This will come in macroeconomics when we talk about income inequality, poverty. Equity should not be confused with equality, though. Equality is when everything is equal, while equity is when things are fair. There's like a line between the two, where equality is when everything is the same amongst everyone, whereas in equity, everything is the same in terms of fairness. Yeah. So next we have economic well-being, which is a concept that has several different dimensions, as the book says. The first one is security with respect to income and wealth, having a job and housing. So this refers to an individual having economic well-being, and usually this just means that they have a job, they have wealth, they have a house, etc. Most of these are on a personal basis. So the next one as well, the ability to pursue one's goals, work productively, and develop one's potential. This aids to economic well-being as well as the economy as a whole, because if one is happy, if one is achieving its goals, usually they work more productively and can help grow the economy. This will show up in macroeconomics, so we can go into more depth later on. Then we have sustainability. This one's pretty straightforward. It refers to the long-term maintenance or viability of any particular activity or policy. So this just means that anything that we do is for the benefit of the environment, but not always, because sustainability also again links back to efficiency, where it's are we using resources correctly, are we using resources as efficiently as we can. Next we have change, which is an essential part of wait 1 second. Next is change, which quite literally is change, and it's when in economics often we can change from one situation to another, and we look into how it was caused by a change in one or more variables. So this can refer to technological change or social political change and its impact that it has on the economy. So next we have interdependence, which refers to the idea that economic decision-making interact with and depend on each other. So for example, we can take the different stakeholders, which we'll go into, but they are basically just consumers, workers, firms, and governments. And all four of these are interdependent, because a choice that a consumer make heavily affects firms, which heavily affects workers, which can also heavily affect government. For example, if consumers are demanding less, firms make less profit, so they can't pay their workers, so they have to fire some of their workers, and then governments have to deal with the costs of unemployment. Lastly, we have intervention, which typically refers to government intervention, meaning that the government becomes involved with working of markets. An example that also has to do with sustainability is when governments intervene to have more sustainable economic development, such as green farming, organic farming, promoting veganism, things like that. So those were all the key concepts. So we can talk about the fundamental problems of economics now, which are scarcity and choice. So as I talked about, the problem of scarcity is that humans have many needs and wants, and some of these are satisfied by physical objects and others by non-physical activities. So one main one that I like to talk about is oil, because oil is running out, and there's a finite amount of oil in the world, and there's like a huge amount of demand for oil, but it's rapidly running out. So when we have the problem of scarcity, there aren't enough resources to produce everything that human beings need and want, and because of our heavy dependence on oil, at some point the toll of our dependence on it is going to start hitting back on us, because it is a scarce resource. So why scarcity forces choices to be made? Again, with oil, because oil is scarce and we have such a heavy dependence on it, we need to make a choice of whether we want to continue to produce and continue to be reliable, or whether we should invest and choose, if we want to invest, in other more sustainable ways of producing oil, so we can continue to rely on energy and things like that for our daily lives, because our society is so accustomed to it. So yes, again, the next part again talks about sustainability, which I talked about. 1 second. What? Okay, wait, I don't know why this is. Okay, wait. Oh, here we go. Is this the last one? Yeah. Okay, so next, this book talks about resources as factors of production. So the 4 factors of production, which you need to drill into your head, because these are the most important parts of economics, especially in IB. The 4 are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Land consists of all natural resources, so oil, agriculture, water, forests, rivers, lakes, etc. Then we have labor, which shouldn't be confused with like actual hard labor. It basically just includes everything, like being a teacher, working, construction worker, economist, doctor, taxi driver, etc. Anything that requires time and effort is considered labor. It just includes any job. Then we have capital, which are man-made factors of production, such as machinery, tools, factories, buildings, road systems. Capital is just a good that allows for the production of another good. And lastly, we have entrepreneurship, which is special human skill possessed by some people, because not all people are able to be entrepreneurs. It requires a lot of creativity, and it just involves the ability to innovate by developing new ways of doing things. Yes. So then we also have different forms of capital, which were the goods that we use to create other goods. So we have physical capital, which is Okay, so physical capital is like physical goods that are used to produce other ones, such as roads, buildings, etc. Then we have human capital, which is it just has to do with education, since investing in education is a good that leads to another good. If one is well educated, you can enter the job market and have skills that are good. Then we have natural capital, which is the expanded meaning of the factor of production, land. It includes everything that has land, and oftentimes this could mean biodiversity, soil quality, and ozone layer, since these are all things that we invest time in. So this is another good, basically, but it's a natural good that aids to the production of other goods. Then we have financial capital, which includes stocks and bonds. These are used to buy financial instruments. We don't need to talk about stocks and bonds yet. That comes later on, and it's quite complicated. So we can skip that for now. Then we have scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is defined by this book as the value of the next best alternative that must be given up or sacrificed in order to obtain something else. This means that, let's say you have €2 and you want to get a pack of milk that costs €2, but you also want to get a pack of cereal that costs €2. Both of these cost €2, and you want to get both of them so you can have milk with your cereal. But you realize that you only have €2, so you can't afford both. Which one will you pick? Well, I personally would pick the cereal, since I could eat the cereal without the milk. It's not the best, but I could still eat it. So I'll buy the cereal over the milk, but the milk that I haven't bought is my opportunity cost. So that's basically the definition of it. Then we have free and economic goods. So So the difference between free and economic goods is that a free good is any good that is not scarce and also has zero opportunity cost. You could usually say that these are usually naturally occurring resources such as air, but recently we've made a more of like a better definition of it. Even oxygen is a scarce resource, so I wouldn't really consider it a free good. I can't think of any free goods at the moment, but you could this book talks about oxygen, but I wouldn't really refer to oxygen as a free good because it is scarce. In the past, you could have considered it as scarce because it didn't threaten us, the fact that it was decreasing, but oxygen levels are decreasing, so I would say that it is scarce. So we get to the second part of this unit, which we go into the basic economic questions. These are the ones that lead the economy, basically. So these are what, how much to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So what, how much to produce refers to opportunity cost, where it's like what should we produce and how much of it should we produce. How to produce refers to how we should employ the factors of production to make goods and services, and for whom to produce is for who should we make goods and services. If I make a good, who do I want to be selling it to? Do I want to sell it to someone in the first place? Which obviously you would. So then we have resource allocation and output income distribution. So resource allocation refers to the assigning available resources or factors of production to specific uses chosen among many possible alternatives, and involves answering the question. Okay, so the resource allocation basically refers to if you have a bunch of water and a bunch of wood, who are you going to send the water and the wood to? Usually this is assigned by the government, or more free market economies, it is just based on price, and if you can sell it for a better price, you're going to be having the resources. If you can buy it for a better price, you're going to have the resources as well. So then distribution of income refers to for whom to produce. So we'll go into this later, but selling goods can redistribute income based on taxes. The government has a role in it. So if one so if the amount of output people can get depends on how much of it they can buy, this in turn depends on the amount of income they have. So if a person has low income, they cannot buy as much. If a person is high, obviously they can buy a lot more. So this, when we talk about the for whom to produce, a lot of people or luxury brands aim to produce for people who have high incomes rather than those with low incomes, because they are more likely to buy their products. So then this part is the part in red is not very relevant, so we can skip that. We can also skip this, to be fair. I've never done this. Oh, sorry for the editors, like, just cut this out, please. I'm so sorry. Okay, so then we can talk about economic systems, which are generally divided through the free market economy, planned economy, and mixed economy. I talked a little bit about it just now. I would like to think of these as a scale. I could actually draw it up. And I'm also going to draw this on a scale in terms of political aspects. So if I go to notes, and I just do this real quick. Wait 1 second while I do this, because my Apple Pen, there we go. Is it working? Yeah, okay. So we can form a model for the economic types of economic markets. Oh, wait. Yeah, okay. So I like to think of it as a scale, which is dynamic, and there's no end to it, but I'm just going to do this for the sake. I would like to think of it as infinite, because there are many ways of having the different types of economic systems. I will also draw these in terms of left and right wing. So on the left we have free market, and on the right we have, what was it called? Planned economy. And in the middle we have mixed. Like this. This is how I like to think of the different economic market systems. So free market basically means that the economy is driven by price, and everything is determined by the consumers and the firms who are mostly in charge of basically everything. Well, on the other side we have the planned economy, which is an economy that is driven by the central government. So all the goods and services, all the questions that we just discussed, those are all assigned by the government, and the government makes the rules, the government sets the prices, the government distributes jobs and income, etc. So examples for these, under planned economy, often communist states fall, which are not very much existent anymore. You can say that North Korea is very much a planned economy, because the government basically just controls everything. On the other hand, we have free market. I would put this one as the United States, because their market is very much driven by consumers. The general culture is very consumerist, and the government does have a little bit control. Again, I would just like to note that these examples do not fully fall into each box. I would say the USA maybe comes a little bit more here, if that makes any sense, because again, this is dynamic. There is no like set, but I'm just trying to show the different ends of the scale here. So yes, the US would be considered a free market, and for mixed, I would put any European country. I'll put the Netherlands in mixed, because it's very much free market in terms of the prices are driven, but the government still has a lot of control in terms of taxes and distributing wealth and everything, etc. So we can also take a few more examples. I would put China in between mixed and planned, since it's still partly communist, and it has a lot of involvement from the government. Russia also falls around this area. I would also put the Netherlands a little bit more here, but we can also put Canada here, for example, since they have a very much consumerist culture similar to the United States, but their government has slightly more control than the United States. The United States is really one of the most free market countries in the world. So, if we go back to our textbook, which I have to, there we go. So we just went over these. Yeah. Okay, so now we can get into the production possibilities curve, which basically refers to opportunity cost and one of the questions, which is what to produce. So I'm going to draw this out so I can explain this more clearly. Let me just erase all this. There's probably a button for this, but whatever. So whenever we draw an economic diagram, we're going to have two axes, the y-axis and the x-axis. And in micro, since this is going to be a opportunity cost is generally a production possibilities curve is generally a micro diagram. We're going to label the y-axis as P, which stands for price, and the x-axis is Q, which stands for quantity. This you always want to have this as your basis for any economic diagram. So what, oh, and sorry, zero here. So what a production possibilities curve looks like is this. It's a very bad curve. I'm sorry for my shaky hand. It's supposed to be a little bit oval over there, but you get the idea. So what this means is that we have two goods on each axis. We can put iPads on the x-axis and TVs on the y-axis. And what this basically means is that if we draw a straight line from here and down. Oh, wait. Sorry, my mistake. This was supposed to be Q as well because we're not talking about price right now. So, but generally you would put P up there. So if we take this quantity of TVs, so this amount of TVs are produced, we can say these are 20 TVs. That means if we go onto this curve, at this point, point A, this many iPads are produced. We can say that is 30, since you can see it's slightly more, okay? So when 20 TVs are produced, 30 iPads can be produced. Let's say the demand for TV rises. So we want to increase the amount of TVs produced, okay? So let's say we have 40 at Q2. We can draw out this and we can bring it down. Q2. So as you can see, when we increase the amount of TV produced, the amount of iPads produced decreases. So let's say that this is 20 iPads now. So what it means when we talk about production possibilities is that there's a limited amount of resources that we have. So with these resources, we can produce 40 TVs, but 20 iPads. But we can also produce 20 with 30. Does that make, wait, oh boy. Okay, that doesn't add up. It doesn't add up, but you get the idea. Put 30 there. You put 30, then it adds up. They're both 60, okay? So we have 60 in total. We can't exceed 60. So here we're going to have 60, and then we have 0 over here. Here we have 60, but it's going to be 0 there. So we have a maximum of 60. When the economy grows, we can shift this out over here like this and bring it down, but we talk about that more in macroeconomics. The idea here that you just want to have is that there's a limited amount of things that we can produce, and oftentimes we have to make a choice whether we want to produce more TVs or more iPads, and then when we choose 40 TVs over 30, the opportunity cost for iPads, wait, I'm not having a good math day. There we go. So when we produce 40 TVs and 30 iPads, the opportunity cost here is that we lose out on 30 more iPads that we could have produced. Okay? So that's basically this entire chapter. This refers to scarcity, etc. Since there's like a limited amount of resources, choice again, back to the basic economics. What I would also like to discuss is let's bring back this, bring it back to its basics, which I will do. 1 second. Okay, so we can have point A here, point B, point C, point D. Okay, so what I would also like to say about the production possibilities curve is that at point A, we are producing maximum. At point B, we're also producing the maximum. At point C, if an economy is producing at point C, it means they are not allocatedly efficient. They're not efficient. They're not using the maximum amount of resources, which is this line over here. This line is the maximum amount of resources they have. They're not using the maximum amount of resources they could be using, and they could be producing more goods. This means their economy isn't doing too well. They should employ more resources to reach either A or B. Point D is an unreachable point. Nobody can reach this point unless you shift out your curve this way, which refers when you have economic growth, and you can have point D over here, which would otherwise be unattainable at point A and B because you don't have enough resources to produce this. This curve here could shift out when you have an increase of immigration, which would mean you have more labor, more factors of production, so you can increase the amount that you have as output, because your human resources aren't scarce, you have a large supply of human resources. Okay, so that's it for this. Now, for 1.4, we're going to talk mostly about positive versus normative economic statements. So firstly, positive is usually a way of describing something or stating a hypothesis or a prediction. So the first one that the book gives is a description. For example, the unemployment rate is 5%, or the industrial output grew by 3%. Usually, positive statements include percentages and specific numbers. So then we have a hypothesis. So for example, a higher price of apples results in fewer apples purchased. This again is very, very specific and provides prediction or hypothesis. And then the next one that the book gives is prediction. Unemployment will increase the next year. So this is a very specific prediction about what will happen, or that is, was, etc. So next we have normative statements, which are more general and are vague judgments about what should happen, what is good or bad, or what is right or wrong. What I like to think is the difference between the two is that one is very specific and more to real life, while the other one can be subjective. So for example, the book gives the unemployment rate should be lower. This is subjective. Some people could argue that the unemployment rate should be higher, for example. So the next one is also healthcare should be available free of charge. Again, mostly subjective. I think most people would agree that this is objective. But anyway, healthcare should be available free of charge. Some people could argue against this, so therefore it is normative. And then the last one is the government should spend more money on building schools. Again, subjective. People could argue against this, so therefore it is normative. Here is a table that the book shows between the two. And then it also talks about the role of logic in positive statements or positive economics. So I mentioned how it uses a lot of statistics, otherwise logos if you take English. Here also logic. So what it tells us about logic is that it can include statements such as when it rains, there are clouds in the sky. Again, when we talk about positive statements, we could talk when demand increases, price increases. Like that's just the rule. That's just the rule of supply. So that is a positive statement. And then again, for use of hypotheses. So then we also talk about the ceteris paribus assumption, which is a phrase you will see show up a lot, especially when we talk about demand later on. It basically in Latin means other things equal, which is when we talk about theories, we usually refer to them when there is ceteris paribus, when other things are equal, because usually there are other factors that can influence things. So when we talk about theories, we're like ignoring all those factors around us so that the theory is just a theory. This is irrelevant. I think this is the last one. Wait 1 second. Yeah. Okay. The last subchapter of this unit is just a brief history of the economic thought. So the first economic figure that the book talks about is Adam Smith and laissez-faire. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So Adam Smith is one of the most iconic, well-known economists there is. You probably heard about Adam Smith's invisible hand, which refers to how the economy functions and usually corresponds with the monetist theory, but I'll talk more about that later. So this book just kind of talks about him. If you would like to read this, you could look in your book as well, but I don't really think this is that relevant. The most relevant bit is in the yellow box, which is that Adam Smith is best known for the idea that the interested behavior decision-making without government intervention results in competitive markets that give rise to a more efficient use of resources and greater output, thus benefiting society. This is known as the invisible hand of the market, which I talked about. So then we enter the 19th century, which is known as the era of classical economics. Economic thinking was modified and refined considerably since the time of Adam Smith, and the main economists of the time were concerned with issues like the process of economic growth and distribution of income. So we can talk about the utility theory in classical microeconomics. During the classical economists developed the philosophy of ethics known as utilitarianism, according to which an action is right if it promotes the most happiness for the largest number of people. We'll talk more about utility later, but it just refers to the amount of satisfaction you gain from a product, which was very present in classical microeconomics, because they were very concerned with economic growth and distribution of income. And we talked about how purchasing goods relates to income distribution. So again, during the classical economic times, we have the concept of margin. Again, with the concept of utility, there's also marginal utility. So marginal and utility were combined during this time. Marginal means extra or additional. So when we talk about marginal utility, it's related to the extra or additional satisfaction gained from producing an extra good or service. We can talk about the marginal utility theory of marginal utility, which will come up later, and it's kind of just like a downward slope since your marginal utility decreases as you purchase more. Then we can talk about Say's law in classical microeconomics. So Say's law is that supply creates its own demand. This is a theory that claims that the economy tends toward full employment in the absence of any government intervention. So this is, again, the classical monetarist theory. It just refers that the economy functions on its own without government intervention. This highly relates to free market economies, since these do not want government intervention. They believe that the economy can fix itself, and the economy is driven by human behavior by itself. So then we have the Marxist critique of classical economics. We all know Karl Marx. He came up with a Marxist theory, and therefore a lot of his thoughts relates to more planned economies. So he usually talked about he developed a theory to which capitalism would eventually be replaced by communism because of the market system's internal contradictions that would lead it to collapse. This is a very much communist theory. Again, Marx was leaned very much more to the planned economy. So while this was not materialized, Marx is still highly regarded for his numerous insights into how capitalism works. He very much critiqued capitalism. You could read a bit more about it here if you would like. But this was again during like the 19th century. So during the 20th century, we have the Keynesian revolution. What I would like to know is that the two schools that we have just come across are the classical or monetarist school of economic thought, and now we are talking about the Keynesian school of economic thought. So he came about during the 20th century, and he kind of criticized the classical economic school of thought, not as much as Marx, because Keynes was still very much for free market economy, but in a different way. It was a bit more for a mixed economy, we could say. So one of the important contributions of Keynes was that the idea that an economy left on its own will not necessarily lead to full employment, thus requiring government intervention in order to ensure that full employment will be achieved. So unlike Marx, Keynes discusses that we can have an economy that functions on its own, but it will not reach full employment, or not necessarily reach full employment. So we need a little bit of government intervention in order to ensure that full employment is achieved. So he's very much in the middle of free market and planned economy. So then we have the emergent macroeconomic policy. This again is not very much relevant. You can read about it if you would like. So here we have the monetarist / new classical counter-revolution. So monetarists Monetarism, the neoclassical economics, is kind of based upon the classical economic theory school of thought. So we can say that according to monetarist neoclassical schools of thought, the government intervention prevents the economy from reaching a state of full employment on its own, whereas a free market economy without the government intervening will tend toward full employment. So this is very, very much for free market economy. It is basically based of classical, but it's a bit more of a modernist view taken upon after Keynes criticized the classical view. So the two schools of thought that we have now are the monetarist or neoclassical versus the Keynesian one. So in the 21st century, we have the revolution of behavioral economics with psychology. This is one of my favorite parts of economics. Behavioral economics questions the idea that marginal utility underlies demand and rational consumer behavior. It just kind of, it's very much to do with microeconomics and like individual decisions. You could read a bit more about this if you like. This is irrelevant. Yeah. So we have reached the end of this unit. In the next unit, we will go a bit more into quantitative things. So I will be explaining that a bit more in detail. This was kind of just an introduction and explaining a bit the idea of economics. It was quite vague. Apologies for that. This is just kind of like the nature of this unit. You don't need to know that much about this unit. It's very, very unlikely to show up on IB exams. It's just good to know, especially with the schools of thought. Remember the schools of thought and know how they work, because that will come up again later in macro. I hope this video was helpful. The next video will definitely be a bit more helpful because that is a bit more theoretical and I can talk a bit more about theory. So yes, I'll see you next time.